The Door Without Knock, Part 1, County Limerick, Ireland, February 1847. The wind found every crack in the cottage. It crept beneath the door. It whispered through the loose stones of the walls. It drifted down the chimney, carrying the smell of rain and damp earth. Breda Keane pulled her shawl tighter across her shoulders and moved closer to the dying fire. Calling it a fire was generous. 3 small sticks and a handful of twigs glowed weakly beneath a blanket of grey ash. There was no turf left. There hadn't been for nearly 2 weeks. She held out her hands anyway. Sometimes pretending there was warmth was better than admitting there wasn't. Her son, 7-year-old Seamus, sat on the floor beside his little sister. Breed, only 4, had wrapped herself inside an old blanket until only her bright blue eyes were visible. "I'm still cold, ma'am." "I know, darling." "When will we get more turf?" Breda smiled. "Soon." She had said soon every day, and the children still believed it. She wished she did. The cottage was little more than a single room. 1 bed, 1 table, 3 stools, a fireplace, a shelf holding 3 cracked bowls and a blackened cooking pot. Outside, less than a 1/4 acre of land stretched toward the narrow hedgerow. Before the blight it had been enough. Not enough to prosper, enough to live. Now it yielded almost nothing. The potato ridges lay dark and empty. The earth itself seemed to have forgotten how to feed people. 8 months before, everything had been different. Her husband, Seamus Keane, had been coming home from the fields when he heard shouting near the river. The landlord's young son had slipped from the bank, and the current had caught him almost immediately. Without pausing to remove his boots or coat, Seamus had plunged into the icy water. By the time he dragged the frightened boy ashore, both were barely conscious from the cold. The landlord had wept openly. He had clasped Seamus by both shoulders. "You've saved my son." Within a week, a new lease had been drawn up. 3 years, no rent, not a single penny. Neighbours had called it a miracle. Breda had thought so too. Then the fever came. It began with a cough, then chills, then the burning heat that left him shaking beneath every blanket they owned. The parish doctor could do little. The priest prayed. Breda scarcely left his bedside. 9 days later, she became a widow. The free lease remained. The man who had earned it did not. There had been kindness after the funeral. Neighbours brought broth. The women of the parish baked oatcakes when they could spare the meal. Father O'Donovan quietly left bread more than once after Sunday Mass. Even the landlord had sent flour during the first weeks. But everyone was struggling now. There was little left to share. Charity had limits when an entire country was hungry. Breda had accepted every gift with gratitude. She had also accepted that she could ask for no more. She opened the meal barrel. Its hollow echo answered before she looked inside. Empty. She lifted the flour sack. Nothing. She searched every shelf. Half an onion, a pinch of salt, nothing else. She looked towards the children. They were pretending not to watch her. Children always knew. That evening she made supper. Hot water, the half onion, the salt. She stirred it carefully until it became a thin broth. Breda smiled as though it were a feast. "It smells nice." Breda turned away before her daughter could see the tears filling her eyes. After the children had fallen asleep, Breda remained beside the fireplace. The last ember faded into darkness. She already knew what she had to do. She had resisted the thought for weeks, perhaps months. But there was no escaping it now. The workhouse. The word itself felt heavy. She had heard the stories, families separated, disease spreading through crowded wards, people entering through the gates and never returning. Some said the workhouse kept you alive. Others said it merely delayed death. She looked at her sleeping children. What choice remained? A roof meant little if there was nothing to eat beneath it. Tomorrow she would walk to Limerick. She would ask if there was room, and if there was, she would take the children inside. If there wasn't, she dared not imagine what came next. Long after midnight, while the village slept beneath a moon hidden by clouds, another figure walked silently along the narrow lane. The traveller wore a dark hooded cloak. One hand carried a rough canvas sack. The other held a small lantern, its flame turned low. The figure paused outside the Keane cottage, and for several moments there was no movement, only the sound of the wind. Then the sack was placed gently against the door. It was heavy, Inside lay 10 pounds of oats, 6 pounds of rice. Enough to keep 3 people alive for many days if used carefully. The figure looked toward the tiny cottage. A faint glow escaped through a crack in the shutter. After a long moment, the hooded stranger stepped back into the shadows. Crossing the lane, the figure disappeared among a stand of ash and hawthorn trees overlooking the cottage. There, hidden in darkness, the stranger waited. Just after sunrise, Breda wrapped her shawl around herself. "Come along," she whispered. "We'll go to the workhouse after first light." She reached for the latch, opened the door, and froze. A canvas sack rested upon the worn stone doorstep. She looked up and down the empty lane. No one. Only the morning mist drifting across the fields. Slowly, almost afraid to believe her own eyes, she untied the cord. Oats. Beautiful clean oats. Beneath them, rice. More food than had entered the cottage in weeks. Her hands began to tremble. Behind her, little Seamus appeared in the doorway. "Ma'am?" She could barely speak. I don't know who." Then she did the only thing she could think of. She looked towards the grey morning sky, crossed herself, and whispered, "Whoever you are, may God bless you." Far beyond the hedgerow, hidden among the trees where no one could see, the hooded figure watched her smile for the first time in many months. Then, without a sound, turned and walked away. Part 2. County Limerick, late February 1847. The first loaf Breda baked filled the little cottage with a smell she had almost forgotten. Warm oats, wood smoke, hope. Not enough hope to banish the famine, but enough to quiet the fear that had lived in the room for so many weeks. She stirred a small pot of rice over the fire, while Seamus and Breed watched as though witnessing magic. "When can we eat, ma'am?" Breed asked. "Soon," Breda replied with a smile. This time she meant it. The 3 of them sat around the little table. Each bowl held only a modest portion. Breda insisted the children eat first. "Ma'am," Seamus protested, "you need it too." "I've had a taste while I was cooking." It wasn't true. Her son knew it wasn't true. Without a word, he lifted a spoonful from his own bowl and dropped it into hers. Breed copied him immediately. "So you won't be hungry." Breda blinked hard to stop the tears. Children should not have to learn sacrifice so young. Yet famine had made old souls of many young hearts. They ate slowly, not because there was plenty, because they wanted the meal to last. When the bowls were empty, Breed sighed happily. "My tummy doesn't hurt any more." Breda reached across the table and gently stroked her daughter's hair, and for that moment she allowed herself to believe they might survive another week. After washing the bowls, she tied her shawl tightly around her shoulders. "I'm going to see Father O'Donovan." Seamus looked up. "To tell him about the food?" "Yes. And maybe he'll know who brought it." Breda smiled. Perhaps. Though she suspected otherwise. Anyone wishing to be thanked would surely have left a name. Father O'Donovan was standing outside the chapel, helping an elderly parishioner down the steps. The priest looked thinner than he had only months before. His cheeks had hollowed, his cassock hung more loosely from his shoulders. Even the shepherd had not escaped the famine. "Mrs. Keane." "Father." He immediately noticed the change in her expression. "You've had good news." "I've had something." She told him everything. The empty cupboard, her decision to seek admission to the workhouse, the mysterious sack waiting outside her door. He listened without interruption, and when she had finished he remained silent for a long moment. Finally he smiled. "There are times when Providence arrives without introducing itself." "You know who did it?" He shook his head. "No. I've asked myself 100 times already. I've no answer." He rested a hand gently upon her shoulder. "But I know this." "What?" "You prayed for help?" "I did." "And help arrived." Breda looked down. "I should thank someone." The priest nodded. "Then thank God. If he worked through someone's hands," he smiled, "he knows who they belong to." The news spread quickly through the parish, not because Breda wished it to, because good news had become so rare that people clung to it. Neighbours visited throughout the afternoon. Old Mrs. Ryan was the first. She peered into the canvas sack. "That's fine oatmeal." "It is. Who gave it to you?" "I don't know." Mrs. Ryan frowned thoughtfully. "It wasn't me." Breda laughed. "I never thought it was." "It wasn't the Murphys either, I've already asked, nor the O'Callahans. They're barely enough themselves." Soon everyone was offering theories. It could have been someone passing through, perhaps an American relative. Maybe the landlord. "No," another neighbour replied, "if it were the landlord you'd know it." Each suggestion sounded less likely than the last. By evening, the mystery remained. 3 nights later, a cold rain swept across the countryside. Breda woke briefly to the sound of it striking the thatched roof. She listened. The wind, the rain, nothing more. Then, perhaps, footsteps? She sat upright. The sound was gone. After several moments, she lay down again. It was only the weather, she whispered to herself. Outside, a hooded figure stood motionless beside the stone wall that bordered the lane. Rain dripped steadily from the cloak. Balanced carefully against one shoulder was another canvas sack. The figure waited. A lantern glowed in a distant cottage. Not yet. Patience. Only when the last light in the village had disappeared did the stranger cross the lane. The sack was placed gently against Breda's door. This one contained oatmeal, rice, a small wrapped parcel of salt, and tucked carefully beneath the oats, a single twist of tea, a luxury almost impossible to obtain now. The hooded figure lingered only a moment before retreating to the shelter of a stand of ash trees. There, hidden among the dripping branches, the stranger watched. The following morning, Breda was first awake. "Ma'am." Breda opened her eyes. "What is it?" "There's another one." She hurried to the door. Another sack, almost identical to the first. She looked immediately toward the lane, empty. She ran to the gate. No footprints survived the night's rain. Only puddles, only silence. She untied the sack, and then she saw the tea. Her hand covered her mouth. Tea. Someone hadn't simply thought about keeping them alive. Someone had remembered comfort. Someone had remembered kindness. That afternoon, Breda called on every house within walking distance. The answer was always the same. No, it wasn't us. I wish it had been. She even stopped at the blacksmith's forge. "Have you seen anyone walking these roads after dark?" The blacksmith scratched his beard. "Only one." Her heart quickened. "A traveller?" He shook his head. "No." "What did he look like?" "I couldn't rightly tell you." "Why not?" "He wore a hood." "Was he old?" "I don't know." "Tall?" "Perhaps." "Did you see his face?" "Not once." He smiled apologetically. "I'm afraid that's all I can tell you." That evening, little Seamus sat by the fire. "Ma'am, if we ever find the person, we'll thank them." He nodded. Then asked quietly, "Do you think Da knows?" Breda looked into the flames. "I hope so. I think he'd be happy." "So do I." Breda climbed onto her mother's lap. "I think it's an angel." Breda kissed the top of her head. "Maybe." Outside, the wind rustled through the bare branches. Far beyond the cottage, hidden in the gathering dusk, a lone figure on horseback paused at the crest of a hill. The rider looked toward the thin ribbon of smoke rising from the Keane chimney. For several moments the figure remained perfectly still. Then, satisfied that smoke once again rose from the little cottage, the rider turned the horse and disappeared into the fading light. The mystery had only deepened, and somewhere someone was already planning the next delivery.